Well, I think when it comes to the topic of abortion, everyone has their view. Everyone has their ideas. Everyone has their perspective and feels like they've kind of thought through it well. And so you may be here thinking that. As at the same time, I think that if we take a step back and we look at how do we engage on this topic culturally, I think maybe we can all agree as well that we don't engage well. There's a lot of maybe talking past each other. There's a lot of misunderstanding each other. And I think both sides maybe feel frustrated at times that when they are trying to communicate their view on the abortion topic, they don't feel heard or understood. And it seems like people are dismissing them or the evidence that they are talking about. And so I think, as with many conversations in our very polarized society, I think maybe trying to figure out how do we have better conversations on this? How do we communicate our ideas more effectively, and how do we actually sit down and have productive, thoughtful conversations with people who strongly disagree, especially on this topic of abortion? So that's what I want to try to do today. Now, we're kind of pulling from this book that is our cultural book series. This is part 2 of our cultural book series here in 2025. What Do I Say When by Andrew and Christian Walker, A Parent's Guide to Navigating Cultural Chaos for Children and Teens. And so this is a very helpful little book on what do we say when the question of abortion comes up? What do we say when that topic comes up? What are some core foundational principles? But then also, what are some really good questions to ask? That's one thing I really do appreciate about this book is the conversation starter questions that they present to really kind of hopefully get the conversation going and be able to really understand what the other person thinks rather than you just always saying your view. So I want to talk about that, but I also want to spend the vast majority of today's show addressing your specific questions, your objections, the things that you find difficult or pressing to discuss or to make sense of when it comes to this issue of abortion. So that's why we're here. My name is Ryan Pauly. This is the show Think Well, that is designed to try to help you think well about the Christian faith, as well as think well about cultural issues, and so that you can engage the culture well. Now, I don't always think well about things and I don't always engage well, but I think that's one thing I love about this show and all the comments I get, whether it's live callers, whether it's in the live chat, or whether it's after the fact in the comment section, of pushing back against my arguments and positions to try to figure out, okay, how can I say this better? Is there a more effective way of communicating what I am trying to communicate? So that's what I try to do here on the show. And hopefully it is a help to you as well as you think through these things and try to engage in productive conversations, whether you agree with me or not. How do we both, or how do we all have better, more productive conversations? Now, before I get into today's show, I just want to pause for just a moment and let you know what's coming up. So there may be other things that you want to share with a friend, or you want to make sure you don't miss yourself. Other topics that are maybe interesting. And so just to let you know what's coming up is next week is going to be part 2 of my worldview study, looking at the great tradition of Christian thinking. So what is Christianity based on when it comes to thinking? How do we use our reason, and how do we gain knowledge, and how does faith and knowledge work together? And so that is kind of going to be the topic of next week's show. And then followed by the end of the month Q&A. On the 25th, I'm devoting the entire hour and a half to a Q&A. Now, I'm going to start with the topic of artificial intelligence and is it conscious, because that came in a question in a live chat, and I think maybe in a comment section after a video. And so I want to start with that question, but then I'm going to open it up the entire rest of the show to your calls, your questions. And so if you want to call in, you got to join me at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time every Tuesday. I will be here wanting to chat with you and help us all think well about these difficult, pressing, challenging objections and cultural questions. Now, as far as live events that you can kind of come join, if you are in the Southern California area, I want to again let you know, February 21st is a lecture on astronomy at Biola University. It's at 8 p.m. It's looking at the James Webb Telescope and recent discoveries in cosmology and how that informs our beliefs about the universe and who God is. And so that's going to be a fun lecture. I'm going to be attending that. And if you are in the area, I'd love to see you there. As well as the next day, February 22nd, is the MAVEN conference. So there's a wide range of speakers that are becoming, helping equip you on how to engage this culture with truth and what's the other word? Not compassion or grace, and confidence. I think courage. Yeah, truth and courage. There we go. So more information can be found at mavenconferences.com on that. And I want to let you know. And then also, if you are a high school or college student and you want to go to Utah with me, do some theological study, head out to Utah and have conversations with Mormons, there is a MAVEN open enrollment trip that you can check out. So if you go to maventruth.com, go to the open enrollment tab, you can find more information there. Now, as far as next month, to kind of give you also a little look forward into March, our worldview topic will be on biblical and theological studies. Our cultural topic will be on sexuality, and our apologetics topic will be on the Leibnizian cosmological argument. So if those sound like fun conversations, if those sound like things that you want to engage in, why don't you subscribe, hit like, and follow? And I almost never say this either, but hey, while I'm on the kind of on my soapbox or whatever you want to call it, I guess not a soapbox, but if you're listening on podcast and you're enjoying the show, I would really appreciate a review and a rating. That just helps the algorithms get it out there. It functions way different than YouTube, and so I don't know how it works exactly, but hey, that's that, and hopefully you're enjoying this, and just love to hear from you. So with that, I think that's all the announcements. Our topic today on abortion. I think one thing that's helpful, and again, if you missed last week, kind of the introduction to this book, one thing that's nice is this book is like 8 pages per chapter. It's super short. However, I think that also is a downside in that it doesn't really go deep in ways I think it should go deep. And so you miss out when you have a book that covers a wide range of issues and can't really go deep into them. But I think it does provide a helpful kind of introduction and kind of in starter questions. So again, if you want to join me and read through these chapters, I'd love to have your questions as well related to the reading. But where he starts, and I think is helpful, is he kind of starts with a little 1-page introduction story about his daughter asking him about abortion and what all the signs in the yards meant that were pro-choice and pro-life signs. And he talked about how he responded to his daughter. But one of the things that he said to his daughter was this. He said that even though people think differently, even though there are people who think differently than the way we think, we have to do our best to change their minds respectfully, peacefully, and firmly while still loving them, even if we disagree with them. And I think that's so helpful, no matter who is listening, is that when it comes to ideas and topics that matter, like abortion is one of those, morality is one of those, marriage, these things that actually impact significantly people's lives, we should be trying to change people's minds. In fact, my friend Richard Suttles, the faithiest atheist, one time he talked about how the Mormons came to his door. He's an atheist. The Mormons came to his door, and he talked about how he got in a conversation with them, and they said something about how they are prepared if they're talking to a Christian. They know the Christian is trying to change their mind, but often they don't. And I said, what do you think, Richard, when a Christian is not trying to change your mind? And he goes, well, if a Christian's not trying to persuade anybody, if a Christian's not out there evangelizing, I think not doing their job. I said, can I quote you on that? He said, absolutely. So I have that quote in my presentation when I talk about Mormonism, is that we should be, especially as Christians, trying to persuade people. Like that is the job that we have of sharing especially the good news and evangelism, is trying to make a case for the truth of Christianity, yet do so with gentleness and respect. And I think if you are not a Christian and you're out there, you probably have your views that you think are right. And maybe you're going to show up on my show, and I hope that you do, in trying to persuade me to think differently. Maybe you think I'm wrong about something. And so the question is, when we think that others are wrong about a topic, how do we go trying to persuade them? Do we shout them down? Do we enter into a cancel culture where we just silence them and don't let them speak? Do we just yell at them like they're wrong? Do we just call them a liar and a fraud and just, hurl insults at them? Or do we, if we think that someone is wrong, actually respect them enough to try to sit down and respectfully, peacefully, and firmly try to persuade them using good arguments, evidence, and reason of a different way of looking at the world? And I think that's what I want to do here. That's my goal. That's how I want to engage in each conversation. I know I don't do that well, but I think that's the goal that hopefully all of us recognize is, when it comes to these important issues, does God exist? How should we live? How should we make laws that impact people in our society? We should recognize when people think differently, our goal should do our best. We all should be trying. You should be trying to change my mind, and I want to try to change your mind, but doing so respectfully and peacefully and firmly while still loving people who disagree with us. I think that is a good goal for us all to have. Now, in this book, then he kind of walks into this biblical teaching and overview. Now, what I want to just say here, and I forgot to say here at the very beginning, is one thing that's different about this show, and I did say this at the beginning, is I want to focus it on your questions and your calls and the things that are challenging you or confusing you on this topic or other topics. And so please post post your questions in the live chat using a Q or call in using the link that I posted there as well. But I've done a significant 3 other shows on the topic of abortion before. So if you go back on YouTube at least, and you can search, if you search Megan Allman, that was one of the first shows I ever did on abortion, and where we focused specifically on making a case for the pro-life position. And then we responded to a ton of objections. And so we spent a long time kind of making a case of why do pro-lifers believe that abortion is wrong. And then we responded to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different objections against the pro-life position. And so that is about an hour and 45-minute live stream, specifically making a case and responding to objections. Later, I did an interview with Natasha Crane. You can search Natasha Smith. Natasha Crane's a different apologist. Natasha Smith, on how does the pro-life movement support abortion vulnerable women? So we look specifically at this question of why do women feel like they have no other choice but abortion? And so we looked at those instances of why women feel like this is their only option. And then how should we, and how does the pro-life movement come alongside those women to support them and love them and encourage the women in that? And so that was about another hour show, looking at different organizations and different stories of people that have chosen to have life because they realize that this dire circumstance that they are in, there's actually help, and that their only option is not abortion. Lastly and thirdly, I did a show with Josh Brahm, B-R-A-H-M, from the Equal Rights Institute. And we looked at 3 different responses to my body, my choice. And when someone says, well, my body, my choice, well, what could that mean? And there's 3 different ways in which that can be argued. And then how then do we respond to each one of those arguments based on how that person is using the argument, my body, my choice. And so that is, I think I've tried to produce a wide range of content showing the value of this conversation, why it matters. How do we come alongside, support women emotionally and physically and practically in this issue, as well as how do we think about this intellectually and respond to common objections? And so that's why in today's show, I don't want to spend a ton of time, just myself, talking through all these arguments for and against the pro-life position. I've done that before. Instead, I want to kind of walk through this chapter, lay a biblical foundation for having this conversation, think through some conversation starters, and then I want to get to your questions and your calls. So you can be sending those in, and I'd be happy to address them here in just a little bit. And so what Andrew and Christian Walker then do is they get into a biblical teaching and overview of how do we think biblically about this idea of abortion. And they think that one of the most important biblical truths, I think often if you say like, what is the most important biblical truth when it comes to the topic of abortion? I think for myself and for others, we would jump maybe to Genesis 1:27, that God created male and female in his image, that all human beings bear the image of God and therefore are valuable. Well, they start in a different point. They actually start in Acts 3:15. Acts 3:15 actually talks about God being the author and giver of life. Specifically here in Acts 3:15, it says this in the CSB version, the Christian Standard Version. You killed the source of life, whom God raised from the dead. We are witnesses of this. So speaking of Jesus Christ and who God is the source of life. As a Christian, we believe that God created all, that he is the first and the last, the beginning and the end, that all life is because of him, and he holds everything in his hand, as Colossians 1 talks about, that he is created and sustains everything. And so this then has to feed into our current cultural understandings when we're talking about the value of life, recognizing that life is a gift from God. This is not something I just own myself. I did not create my own life. Life is a gift that was given to me by my parents, and their lives were given to them by their parents. And this gift of life ultimately goes back to one who is life. God is life and is able to give it. I talked about this in past shows when we talked about the existence of the soul, that we are a borrowing lender of existence, of life. I first have to borrow life from my parents to then give it to my kids. But if I don't have it, I can't give it. Versus God is the owning exister of life. He just is life. He is eternal. He has always had it. And he then has the ability to give it. And so we have to recognize that he is the author of life, the giver of life. And therefore we have to go back to who is God and how did he create us in order to make sense of this question when we're discussing questions related to life. And so they say here, to value life is to honor and respect God's sovereignty over what he has created. And so the 2 or 3 biblical foundations that they give, 3 of them. Number 1, the sanctity of human life begins with God, the creator. Right. And this is where then they go back into Genesis 1, 26 to 28, that we are all made in the image of God, that he is the creator. And therefore we have to go back to him and recognizing that our life is created by him. And therefore it is valuable because we are created by him. They say this: Scripture teaches the marvelous truth that humans possess value, dignity, and worth, not because of anything we do to earn it, but because God is the type of God who simply loves what he created. Now, last part 1 of this series was on human value and human dignity, and we talk a lot more about that. What I want to say here, slightly different kind of conversation, is about a book I'm reading right now. So I'm currently reading the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. And this is a book where I don't know what her religious views are, actually. I haven't looked that up. But this is a book that is, it's called Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents. This is like a New York Times bestseller. This is one of Oprah Winfrey's book review things that she does. And she recommends books for people to read. In fact, Oprah Winfrey wrote an endorsement for this book that was like, this is the greatest book I've ever read. It's the best book I've ever made as part of my book study. Bill Clinton wrote a review, Obama wrote a review, Trevor Noah wrote a review, very positive. And so I don't know what her theological views are, but here's what she's arguing. And she argues in this book that the American racial system functions more like a caste system like we see in India. And she also relates it to what they saw in Nazi Germany, where there's actually a different caste system of the upper class trying to keep their high class and their high caste. And then there's the lower caste and the untouchables, as we see in India. And so she's trying to make this argument that when you look at American history, that our system functions more like a caste system than anything else. And if we look at it that way, that's the best way to make sense of it. Now, you can obviously agree or disagree with that conclusion. That's what she's arguing for. Now, what I thought was interesting is in chapter 6, she addresses specifically what she calls the measures of humanity. And she starts with this story where she talks about this parallel universe, and where she says, in a parallel universe with the laws of nature similar to our own, a conquering people with powerful weaponry journey across the oceans and discover people who look different from themselves. They were startled to chance upon humans who towered above them, who were taller than any humans ever had seen before. They did not know what to make of this discovery. They had thought of and measured themselves as the standard of human existence. But for the indigenous people, they saw were at the outer limits of the particular human trait, their height. And the women averaged over 6 feet and the men were over 7 feet tall and all this kind of stuff. And then she talked about how they created this caste system all based on height, where taller people were more valuable, shorter people were less valuable. And then she talks about how absolutely ridiculous this would be. And she says this, quote, ludicrous though it may sound to us now, had height been the means of categorizing humans for centuries, as it had been for skin color and facial features, people would have accepted it and received wisdom of the laws of nature. So she's trying to say, look, isn't that ridiculous to think about a parallel universe that categorizes people based on how tall they are and then creates this caste system based on height? Well, that's what we've done with race, she argues. That white at the top, black at the bottom, we've created this caste system that's just normal to the people, at least back then, but we would see this as crazy. And what I, could not help but to think through as she addresses this point of the fact that we have this, as she calls in this chapter, what does it say here? The measure of humanity. That she talks about how people have always measured humanity in these external feature ways, based on skull shape, based on facial features, based on skin color, and how absolutely ludicrous it is to look at people and see them differently based on this external measure of humanity. Now, obviously, I could not help but to think about the topic of abortion. I was preparing for it for this week, and I'm reading this book. Now, again, I don't know her view on abortion. But I know the people who have endorsed her book and what they think about abortion, and they would be totally fine with it. And I could not help but think, are they not doing the same thing? That because the unborn is smaller, less developed in a different environment or is more dependent on us. Therefore, they are not valuable and they can be killed. But those who are bigger, adults, who are more developed, who are in a different environment outside the womb versus inside the womb, or are not dependent on their mother for survival, they therefore now have human value and we can't kill them. And I thought, how is this not exactly the same as what she is addressing here, is this major problem that we can't value people based on these external human characteristics, and how ludicrous that is. And I thought, these same people who are reading her book and endorsing it and saying how amazing this is are also people I know that publicly support abortion, which I think does the same thing. And this is what the biblical account, and I think why the biblical account matters, is that in many ways, and Christians have done this too, and Christians owning slaves or whatever. I'm not saying it's perfect. That's why we're not talking about who did what, but we're saying what is true. If we don't accept a Christian view, I think, a biblical view of humanity, then in what way can we say we are all valuable, worthy of dignity and respect? And this is what Scripture teaches, that all people, no matter their size, their level of development, their environment, the degree of dependency, their ethnicity, their skin color, whatever it may be, all humans are intrinsically valuable. But what we've seen throughout human history is that when you don't have that, people have always created some sort of weird line saying you count and you don't. She gets into that in this book where she brings up all these laws. I guess not this book, but the other book I'm reading. She brings up all these different laws of how people try to classify what does it mean to be white. And it's like, if you have 1/5 blood, that's this, or if you have 1/32 this, or if you're half this, or if you're a fourth this, or if you have one grandparent versus three. And it's like, there's all these arbitrary lines. And that's what we find, is that without a foundational principle that says all humans are created in the image of God, therefore are inherently valuable and dignified and worthy of respect, there is no other line. But the moment we erase that, we have seen throughout human history that line gets drawn all over the place to exclude others, but we're always the one that's included, right? We're always included. We just exclude those others who are different than us. So that's the first thing, is the sanctity of human life begins with God, the creator. That's a huge foundational point we have to keep in mind. Number two, they say, Scripture always prohibits the unlawful taking of human life. And they say here, the prohibitions, the unlawful taking of human life, is in Genesis 9:5. That's where after the flood, it says, do not kill human beings. If you shed the blood, your blood shall be shed, because all are created in the image of God. So that shows that the image of God, even though sin has entered the world and humans have killed each other, it did not erase the image of God, but is still there, and humans are still valuable and considered image bearers, even though we are fallen. Exodus 20:13 also brings up this point as well. And they write this: murder is an injustice. And since abortion is the unlawful taking of innocent human life, it too is an unjust action. Now, I've discussed this on shows before, and I think the confusion here often comes down to how do we define murder versus killing, and that's where I think it's important here that they say there's biblical prohibitions against the unlawful taking of human life. We recognize there's a difference between lawfully taking human life, self-defense. People would argue certain aspects of war, maybe the death penalty, and depending on your position, but we recognize there may be times where it is justified to take human life. If I'm being shot at and attacked and someone is trying to stab me and I kill them, I'm not held legally responsible because I'm defending myself. But there is unjustified killing of innocent human being, unlawful killing of human beings, and that would then be considered murder. And that's what we see in Scripture, is the unjustified killing. Now, people often point back to the Old Testament, the Canaanites, all that. It's like, well, we look at, and the Bible is presenting that, at least now. I'm not going into a defense of that. We've talked about that before, and we can talk about that in the questions at the end. But the Bible is presenting that as a defense of, or as the Canaanites being evil. The Bible's presenting that as judgment, not just genocide. And so we see this as judgment against the wicked people, not these innocent human beings that are just being unfairly killed. So we see a biblical command that we should not take human life unlawfully, unjustifiedly. And they then go into, I think, one of the big tactics that sometimes is helpful in a conversation. I talk about this more in my conversation with Josh Brahm on the My Body, My Choice argument. And this is helpful at times, is what Greg Koch calls trotting out the toddler. And they say this: the logic of abortion is so flimsy and outrageous that if one were asked whether it would be okay to kill a toddler, something that we most of us think would answer, we go, no, you can't kill a toddler, a 3-year-old. The types of arguments for killing the unborn also apply to the logic of killing a toddler. So this can be a helpful thing in a conversation where someone says, well, but what if the family is really poor? You go, okay, if the family is really poor, can they kill one of their 3-year-old toddlers because they can't afford to feed him? Well, of course not. Okay. So being poor is not a reason to kill an innocent human being. Well, and you can insert next argument here. Well, but what about this? What about this? What if the parents don't want them? Or what if and the question is, okay, is that reason a good reason to kill a toddler? And if the answer is no, then you recognize if you can't kill innocent human beings for that reason, then you can't kill the unborn for that reason. And so what this points out, and the help, I think, of this analogy or this way of trotting out the toddler, this tactic, is that it gets to the actual issue of that we recognize you can't kill innocent human beings for this reason or for these reasons. The assumption then is that this person doesn't think that the unborn is an innocent human being. Right? Because they recognize you can't kill innocent human beings for that reason. So that kind of boils down and helps you get to, I think, a more important point of what is the unborn. Because if the unborn really is an innocent human being, then no justification is adequate, because there's not a good justification for killing an innocent human being. However, if the unborn is not an innocent human being, then no justification is necessary. Right? If the unborn is just a clump of skin, tissues, a clump of cells, just like my hair cells, when I cut it off, no one goes, Ryan, what'd you do? I'm not growing out my beard right now because I feel like I can't cut this off and throw it in the trash. No, no reason is necessary. If I want to go cut off my beard after the show, I can do it because this is just simply cells. If the unborn is just cells attached to a body like my beard, then I don't have to give any reason. Well, I couldn't afford razors, or I couldn't, it's like there's no reason necessary. Just do it. But if the unborn is a valuable human being, just like that toddler, then is the justification given for killing the unborn adequate? Well, let's apply it to a toddler. Could you kill a 3-year-old for that reason? And often then the argument breaks down. And so I think that's one helpful thing to kind of walk through is making a case. And I do this with Megan Alman in that video. It's in the description below, or maybe it's not in the description below. I need to put it in the description below. Making a case for the unborn. Now, there's two different kind of ways that this can go deductively, or making an argument, a philosophical argument. The one that they have here in their book is different than the one I often use. The one I often use would be like, it is wrong to take the life of an innocent, intentionally take the life of an innocent human being. It is wrong to intentionally take the life of an innocent human being. Abortion takes the life of an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong. Right? That would be a syllogism that like a Scott Klusendorf from the Life Training Institute would use. So then you have to defend, okay, is it wrong to intentionally take the life of an innocent human being? Is murder wrong? Then does abortion take the life of an innocent human being? You'd have to walk through the science of embryology. And if those two premises are true, then the conclusion logically follows, then abortion would be wrong. The argument here is a little bit different. They put it this way. Premise one, an unborn child is a member of the human species. So obviously this would have to be defended scientifically. And I forgot to bring this up, and let me search here really quickly. Tim Barnett from Stand to Reason. You may know him as Mr. B or Red Pen Logic. If you are on Instagram or YouTube, that's where he starts posting as, and his videos are pretty awesome. He wrote an article back in 2019 titled Abortion Advocates Fail Biology, where he quotes from college embryology textbooks from multiple of them. I'll read you just a couple quotes, because the first premise here is the unborn child is a member of the human species. Here's what embryology textbooks say, not just the Bible. The Developing Human, Clinically Oriented Embryology is the textbook. Authors Keith Moore, Mark Torchia say this, quote, human development begins at fertilization, the process during which a male gamete or sperm unites with a female gamete or oocyte to form a single cell called a zygote. This highly specialized totipotent cell marks the beginning of each of us as a unique individual. He then goes on, next textbook. The Langman's Medical Embryology textbook says this: development begins with fertilization, the process by which a male gamete, the sperm, and the female gamete, the oocyte, unite and give rise to a zygote. The Before We Are Born, Essentials of Embryology and Birth Defects says it this way: embryology is concerned with the origin and development of a human being from zygote to birth. In well-known ethicist Peter Singer, who believes that abortion is fine, he writes this in his book, Practical Ethics. It is possible to give a human being a precise meaning. We use it as an equivalent as a member of the species Homo sapiens. Whether a being is a member of a given species is something that can be determined scientifically by an examination of the nature of the chromosomes in the cells of a living organism. In this sense, there is no doubt that from the first moments of its existence, an embryo conceived from human sperm and egg is a human being. And so there's this clear understanding that we have embryologically, that premise one is true, that an unborn child, what is developing inside the womb, is a human being, is part of the human species. Now, again, we may want to disagree and debate about terminology. Well, is it a baby? Is it a child? Is it a zygote? Is it a fetus? These are all different words to describe different levels of development of a human being. Just like after birth, there's a newborn, there's a baby, there's a toddler, there's a teenager, there's a child, there's a teenager, there's an adult, and there's elderly, right? You have different words to describe different levels of development, different stages of what? A human being. So technically, if we want to say strictly, a baby is referred to a born child in the first few months or a year of life, well then yes, the unborn is not a baby in that sense. Sure, call it a fetus, call it what you want. The question is, what is that referring to? And embryology is clear. It is a human being. Number two, they argue then that it is morally wrong to take the life of an innocent member of the human species. And I think this is pretty much universally accepted. Like this, we're talking about murder. Is it ever okay to murder? Is it ever okay to intentionally take the life of an innocent human being? And they're going to argue, no, it's morally wrong to intentionally take the life of an innocent human being. Number three, then. Abortion then does take the life of a member of the human species. Abortion intentionally takes the life of a human being. Now, you may argue about different facets. So let's just say, for example, the life of the mother. The question is, what is the intention? I would argue, this is kind of beside the point, but I would argue this. If the mother is going to die, our intention becomes trying to save the mother. And if there's a way to save both the baby and the mother, then we do that. But if you cannot save the mother and the baby, then the intention is no longer, I just want to kill the baby. The intention is, I'm trying to save the mother, and the baby dies by a result of the process. And so what we recognize here is the intentional taking of innocent human life. So an equivalent for this would be on 9/11/2001. When one of the planes was flying towards the Pentagon, and we scrambled fighter jets to shoot this plane down. Now, those are innocent human beings, the passengers on that plane. Would we be justified? Would the fighter pilots be justified in shooting that plane down? And most would argue, yes, a tragedy. Just like I think the death of an unborn, trying to save the mother's life, is tragedy. We would argue it's justified. Why? Because they are not intentionally trying to kill those people. It's not like that plane would have landed safely and we just shoot it out of the sky. Everyone would cry foul, right? If that were to happen, if that was a perfectly fine functioning plane, not hijacked, it was on its way to its appropriate destination and was going to land effectively and safely, and we just shoot it out of the sky because, well, wait, it might crash, so let's shoot it out now. We would go, no, that's crazy. In the same way, if the pregnancy is functioning well and fine and everything is healthy and normal, and we go, well, let's just end it, something might turn out bad in the future. We don't see that as an appropriate justification. But we would have justified, maybe you would disagree with this, but at least I think many people would justify shooting that plane down. Why? Because you're not intentionally taking the life of those innocent human beings. Your intention, your goal is to stop a terrorist attack. The intention and goal is to stop that airplane from flying into the Pentagon, killing everyone on board and everyone in the Pentagon. So in the act of trying to save everyone in the Pentagon, by default, you have to take the life or you cause the death of everyone on the plane. But we recognize that is justified because your intention is different. And I think the same can be argued here with the life of the mother. And so what we recognize here is that the intention really does matter. And we have to spend some time in thinking about that. And I think most people recognize murder as being wrong. The intentional taking of innocent human life is wrong. And so then we recognize with abortion, the vast majority of abortions intentionally end an otherwise healthy, normal, functioning pregnancy because of desires of people, of the mother. Therefore, if those are true, The unborn child is a member of the human species, and it's wrong to take a life of a member of the human species, and abortion does take the life of the member of the human species, then abortion is immoral. And so that's the argument that they make based on this second biblical principle that Scripture prohibits the taking of innocent human life. Number 3, Scripture, Christians are called to defend the weak. Proverbs 24:11 teaches to rescue those who are being taken away to death and hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. And so we are called to rescue, we're called to save, we're called to love and support and defend those who are weak. And that's why I did a show with Natasha Smith. How do we come alongside abortion vulnerable women who feel like there is no other choice and help support them in encouragement and show them that there is another option, that there are other options out there? And Christians, maybe we can be better at this, but I think we do a really good job. There are more privately funded crisis pregnancy centers in the United States than there are government supported abortion clinics. Private donors coming alongside supporting organizations that come along and provide counseling and therapy and parenting classes and diapers and prenatal screenings and all this sort of stuff for free for women to support them and encouragement in them, encourage them in this time, I think is something that we are called to do biblically. And so with this in mind, they lay out a few truths. It's a scientific fact that human life begins at conception. Every human, whether born or unborn, possesses equal dignity. The unborn child shares the same essential nature of any other human being. The unborn human is not a potential human, but a full human at a lesser stage of development. It is a violation of justice to inflict lethal violence upon a child. Scripture prohibits the unlawful taking of innocent life, which necessarily includes abortion. Christians are called to defend the unborn against cultural forces that would destroy them. Whatever difficult circumstances exist does not justify taking the life of an unborn child. Christians are called to care for the women and men who find themselves considering abortion, and there's no justification for taking an unborn child's life, regardless of the circumstances that led to the child's conception. The mother's father's situation is not made better by murdering someone else. Those are the biblical truths I read through very quickly that they draw from these teachings. Now, with that, I think there's some good questions, and this is where I'll end, and I'm going to jump to your questions. And Mears, I see that you sent in a couple, so I appreciate that. And again, if anyone wants to call in, I want to spend the next hour just talking with you and kind of walking with you through these sort of questions and challenges and that you have. But one, I think, question that they offer here. So here's what I do love about this. Now, again, my critique of this book is they don't respond to objections. There's not here are common pro-choice objections, and here's how to respond. It feels a little bit like there's one time I was talking with a student who had just done some evangelism training, and I said, okay, that's great. Now, what happens when you go out on the street, you share what you just learned with someone, and they go, oh, that sounds interesting, but here's a challenge, or here's a question. I actually don't believe in God, or I don't believe the Bible's reliable. What do you say? And he goes, well, they didn't teach us any of that stuff. It's just, we're supposed to share what we believe and leave it at that. And I thought, okay, well, it's good. That's like step one, but I think we need to go deeper. And I think that's my one critique of this chapter. And again, it's 8 pages. So what can you fill it with? But I would have loved to see a section that's like, hey, if we're going to talk well about this, the moment you present what I just presented, there are going to be some challenges. Here's how to kind of walk through a couple of the more basic ones. Now, what I do appreciate are the conversation starters. So for the littlest children, it's broken up into age groups. Asking questions like, okay, who created us? What else did God make? Is the baby in mommy's belly a real person? What can we do to care for others? But one of the questions they ask for the next level up, I think is a good question to present to someone. If you're having a conversation on abortion, to ask this sort of question, like, when do babies become real people? Right? When does the unborn become a valuable human being? If it's not at conception, where's that line? And then what actually draws the line where you think it's drawn? Is that your opinion? And are you discriminating against people based on an opinion? This is what I referred to in the book Cast, where it's like, we draw the line. It says, okay, skin color is what matters. Or other people draw the line in a different place. Here's what matters. In group, out group. Do we have an objective way of looking at this? Or is it just our opinion? If we look scientifically, the science is clear. It begins at conception. That's not just a biblical truth. That is a scientific fact. So there's a lot of other, I think, good questions, conversation starters. What does it mean to be created in the image of God? How would you describe? Good question to ask another Christian. Kind of thinking through this. How would you describe life begins at conception to a friend that doesn't believe babies have a right to life until they are born? What does this look like? What does Scripture say about murder or abortion or the consequences of both? What's the purpose of government? That's a really good question to kind of think through on this. Okay, what is the government's job? We often talk about don't take away my rights, but isn't the government's job to protect the innocent, punish the guilty? And who is not the most innocent among us except for the unborn? The most innocent, the most vulnerable. So I think these are really good questions to kind of walk through as we try to navigate this conversation. So with that being said, let me jump over to all of your questions. I see a couple in the live chat. Again, send those in. And I want to walk through this with you. Mirza, always good to see you here. I feel like your questions are a vast majority of the ones I get, but I appreciate it. He says here, Mirza, the Protestants weren't anti-abortion until the 80s. They saw it as a Catholic issue. Evangelicals rallied around segregation, and when they lost that fight, they decided to rally around abortion. So here's what I think is really important. I don't know when all of these certain arguments started, but to me, that's beside the point. The point is not what have evangelicals done at some point in the past. The question is what is true. Right. So I think in a different way, but a similar kind of objection is just before I went live, I posted earlier today, I posted a short on objective morality. And if there's just one thing that's always been wrong, then morality is objective, even if we can't make sense of a lot of others. An objection came in like less than an hour before I went live that said something to the effect of, I should just pull it up here so I don't misquote. Can you name one moral idea that has been wrong for all time, that at every time and place in history it was thought of as wrong? Now, I think this is a fundamentally misguided or flawed question. Here's why. When we make these sort of arguments, what we're talking about is what is. There's the difference, and I responded here, and this is maybe a longer breakdown, but the difference between epistemology and ontology. Ontology is what is, epistemology is how we know. So the question is, are human beings valuable independent of what I think? So yeah, maybe evangelicals didn't think as much about the abortion issue as they do now, and now they're a lot more on board. That doesn't change our argument. And maybe at one point, maybe in 50 years, who knows? Let's just say all evangelicals abandon this and are pro-choice. Does that mean that pro-life was wrong? No, because what is right and wrong does not depend on what we think about it or how many people are on our side. And so I think that's the misguided nature of this is I don't have to give an example of something that has always been considered wrong. I'm asking the question, has this always been wrong? Not what have people thought about it? Because if we're going to object to Christian views by saying, well, Christians weren't always supporting of this, well, there are things that atheists didn't always support. Or if you're going to say, well, Christian, I don't think you're right because people think differently. Well, I can say atheists, I don't think you're right because people think differently. Well, of course, people think differently on all sorts of issues and people change their minds on issues. The question is, what are the reasons that we have to go back and to ground our ideas to where I'm trying to say, this is not just my opinion. And that's why I'm trying to make an argument in that syllogism that scientifically, in the research of embryology, our current research and data is unanimous that human development begins at conception. That's not my opinion. That's what science says. You combine a human embryo with a human sperm, you combine a human egg with a human sperm, and you get in a single cell zygote, that embryo, that is a human being. Test the DNA, it's human. That is unquestioned. We look at scripture. We see in Genesis 9, we see in Exodus that we should not be taking the life of an innocent human being. We see in almost every world law recognizing this as well, that murder is wrong. The unjustified taking an innocent human life is wrong. And so we combine this together. We look at what abortion does. Abortion takes the life of an innocent human being. Therefore, if it is taking it for unjustified reasons, and that is a human being, then this is wrong. And so it doesn't matter whether evangelicals supported this less or more in the past and whether we support it less or more in the future. It doesn't matter what people think or what people are saying at that moment or why people are doing it. The question is, what is the thing that we are talking about? Again, now, if we want to kind of also think well about this, pointing out the inconsistencies of someone who holds a view is just another type of logical fallacy, right? So there's the tu quoque or tu quoque fallacy. That if a very overweight, out of shape person gives you exercise advice, right? This is the look who's talking fallacy. Well, look who's talking. Well, does that mean that their advice is inherently wrong or bad? No, they may not follow it, but it still may be good advice. If you say, well, because you're not in shape, therefore I'm not taking this advice is by definition wrong, that is a fallacious way of arguing. It's like, a smoker telling you about how smoking causes cancer and how you shouldn't do it. And you go, well, look who's talking. You're smoking. Well, just because they smoke doesn't mean that what they're saying therefore is wrong. You have to look at the argument itself. Is smoking bad for your health? Yes or no, independent of who the person is that's telling you. And so what we have to do in this sort of conversation is divorce the person making the argument from the argument itself. Let's look at the syllogism that I offered in this book, right? Again, the syllogism as it goes here. An unborn child is a member of the human species. It's morally wrong to take the life of an innocent member of the human species. Abortion takes the life of a member of the human species. Therefore, abortion is wrong. Or the other one is, it's always wrong to intentionally take the life of an innocent human being. Abortion intentionally takes the life of an innocent human being. Therefore, abortion is wrong. Now, say I'm an atheist. Say I'm not a man. Say I'm a woman, right? Divorce the male. Oh, well, you're a man. You can't talk about abortion. Divorce all identity from it. The question is that syllogism, is that argument valid? Do the premises logically follow? Is it sound? Are the premises more plausibly true than false? Well, then the argument's good. And so to point out that evangelical Christians were not always on board with this, I think is a distraction from the argument that we're talking about. So that's where I think it's helpful as we're all trying to think well, and how do we engage this well? The question is, how do we all, because Christians do this too, how do we all think better about the argument being presented and the reasons and evidence to support that argument than the person who's giving it? Because I think it's easy to see someone and go, well, hold on a second. You haven't always thought this way. Or, hold on a second. You don't even follow that advice yourself. Or, and it's easy to say that. Or, can you show me another culture that would agree with you? If you're saying that this is always wrong, where has it always been wrong? It's like, well, no, it doesn't matter what people think. It doesn't matter what people have done. We're not talking about our epistemology, how we understand or know this. We're talking about what is. And I think the core of this argument that's taking place here. Next one here, Mirza, thank you. Again, if you have questions, send those in. Imagine you have to make a choice to save either a 9-year-old Timmy or a jar of 1,000 embryos. The question is, what ice cream will you buy Timmy after you make the easier decision ever? Okay, so this is a very common objection to the pro-life position to say, if you thought the embryos were valuable human beings, then the obvious answer would be to pick the 1,000 embryos over Timmy, because it's numbers. You're saving 1,000 versus saving 1. But the fact is, you will choose to save Timmy. Okay, now let me walk through this with you, Mirza. Let's say I pick Timmy. What does that show? What does that prove about the value of the unborn? Let me change it slightly. Let's say I have a choice to save either my 2-year-old son, Lennox, or 5 kids playing on the playground. And let's say I choose my son. What does that show about the 5 kids playing on the playground? Does that mean that I don't think they're valuable? Does that mean that they're not valuable? I don't see any way how you can make the argument based on this that those kids are not valuable just because I pick my son. At best, you could say, Ryan, you are inconsistent. Maybe I am. If I said, hey, those are valuable, my son is valuable, and I'm picking my son, at best you could say, well, no, those kids are valuable, and so you're being inconsistent because you should have saved the greater number. That's, I think, the best argument that can be made. The matter of fact that we realize is that we have personal connections, and those personal connections drive us to where I'm often more willing to save. We're more willing to save family members, our mom, our dad, our brother, sister, kids, our spouse, than we are strangers. We have a stronger connection to little Timmy. He's got a name than these 1,000 embryos. But how we respond, again, notice how the conversation often comes back to how do we act? where we say morality is objective. You should not do X. And go, but look, people do it. Or look, here, you would live inconsistently. Excuse me. And I think that's not the question that we are here to ask, or that's not the question that's helpful. Is there's a connection. And so, yeah, you comment here, and Mirza, appreciate it. Timmy's not your son. Your analogy doesn't apply. No, the point I'm trying to say is we have connections. I'm trying to say, if we're using this argument, maybe you're not, but I've heard it being used this way. If you were using this argument to say, see, you don't think those 1,000 embryos are valuable, I would say, well, no, that doesn't show that at all. It just shows that we often pick what we have a strong connection to. And so in this case, if Timmy is not my son, then the argument is, well, Timmy is a human being that I can see. I'm looking at this. I forget if you said playground. No, you didn't. I'm looking at Timmy. Timmy's a human being. I can see him. There's a connection there. He's got a face. The embryos don't have faces. And so that doesn't have that connection that we often think. Now, again, that doesn't say, that they're not valuable. That doesn't say that, that I don't see them as valuable. It just shows, I think, the emotional weight that we also put on these questions. Interesting. I just message. There we go. So here, you have a comment here. So let me bring in a guest. This is a very special guest. And I have to say that because of who it is. This is, let me bring you up here. Why are you still in my green room? Remove green room. There we go. This is my boss. Brett, welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm one of your bosses.
That's true. I'm my own boss. You're a boss.
And Emily is also one of your bosses.
And Emily, yeah, there we go. Well, hey, you joined to talk about the MAVEN conference, but you also had texted me a thought here on this response of saving the child over the 1,000 embryos. What did you want to add to this conversation as well?
Well, I was just listening to the live stream a little bit here, and you were talking about, nothing significant follows from the fact that I save my child versus the 5 embryos. And I think you're right. And I think then additionally, you were talking about the personal connections. And I was thinking I'd sketch that out a little bit more and say it's not that merely I have a personal warm connection to my child. It's that the relationship between a father and a child entails certain moral obligations. So as a father, I have moral obligations to my child in virtue of the fact that they are my child. And so, so that's another, I think, piece of the answer that says, yeah, even if there's an active school shooter or whatever scenario you want, and I rush in to save my child, we would say that's appropriate, even though I didn't go around and try to save every other child, because of the nature of the relationship. Fathers have obligations to protect their own children. Now, it wouldn't, we could say, yeah, and after I've maybe protected my child, secured my child, I might go back in for other children as well. But there's not the moral obligation that I have to my own child. I don't have those same obligations to other children. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, what would you say to Mears' response then? It says, no, that Timmy, though, is not your son. So you don't have that same moral obligation because he's not your kid. So how would you then respond there if here is not your child in 1,000 embryos and you don't have that same moral obligation you're discussing there?
Well, so this is where I think we have to make sure that someone who offers a parallel example is actually offering a parallel example, because there's a difference between the scenario where there's a burning building, I rush in, or it's on the playground, whatever scenario, there's a certain threat to my kid and I go in and protect them, versus not taking action. And so we have obligations. So the right to life that someone has That's what we call a negative right. So that negative right, what that does is that puts an obligation on other people not to act in certain ways. Obviously, my neighbor next door has the right to life. Well, I have an obligation not to take their life. There aren't additional obligations on top of that for me to feed and clothe them and house them and things like that. And so I think in some of these things, like when it comes to abortion, um, we all have an obligation not to act in a particular kind of way, not to kill the unborn child. And so there's no, in that situation, there's no positive action I necessarily need to take when it comes to the issue of abortion. I just need not to act in a certain way, and the natural development of the child will take place, and they'll be born, and yeah. So
Yeah. No, that's helpful. Appreciate it. Well, I initially asked you to come on and chat with me because the MAVEN conference here in Southern California, which I mentioned briefly at the beginning of the show, is just about a week and a half or so away. And so I said, hey, Brett, why don't you come on and take 5 minutes to chat a little bit about the conference? And so we're going to take a quick break here and chat with Brett for a few minutes. And then Mears, I see you sent in another question. We'll get to that here in a little bit. But Brett, that's why you're the boss man. That's you come in, you bring that wisdom and help us all think well about these issues. So I appreciate it. But hey, for everyone else, this is Brett, the founder president of MAVEN. And I've had the privilege of working with MAVEN since 2017, since its inception as a field guide and now the director of immersive experiences. I'll be speaking at the MAVEN conference in the student track, talking about to the students and whoever wants to go to that track. I don't think it's just students limited, but how to live live for Christ, how to live well in an immoral world and stand strong for the faith. And live countercultural lives, which is the theme overall of the conference. So Brett, thanks for coming. And what's going on here in a couple of weeks with the MAVEN conference?
Yeah, well, one of the key resources that we offer families, students, adults, churches, church leaders is our annual MAVEN conference. And our first one kicks off on Saturday, February the 22nd in Southern California. And this is a conference where we try to equip Christians with a biblical worldview in order to navigate the contemporary challenges that the culture is constantly throwing at us. And what this allows us to do is, number one, it helps us to disciple believers more effectively. If you want to do effective discipleship, you've got to know the current culture and the ideas that dominate the culture in order to help people think carefully and to see and recognize the challenges to their faith, to the discipleship of their kids, to passing on the faith to their kids, as well as our evangelistic efforts in sharing the truth with our neighbor, knowing the mindset of the culture and figuring out, okay, where are the pressure points? Where are the key issues that I'm going to have to address? What are the objections that often will arise from this? And so just knowing the cultural conditions is so key. And that's really the vision behind the conference. Take biblical truth that is objective, that has been true for the ages, and then apply it to modern contemporary challenges. And so we're doing that at our first one in Southern California in a couple of weeks. We also have expanded the MAVEN conference in September. Saturday, September the 6th, we'll be in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And it's the same theme, same format, just different location because we think being in person actually matters. And so we also have then in November, our third conference this year. That'll be Indianapolis on November the 8th. And we have I'm always excited about the lineup. We've got a couple of speakers this year that we haven't had before, we haven't partnered with before, and excited to have them. So Aaron Wren, who's the author of Life in the Negative World, really looking at how is our culture anti-Christian and what are the challenges that we face because of that. And then also how do we navigate that? There's been clearly a shift in the culture over the last 50, 60 years in its posture towards Christianity. So Aaron Wren's going to help us think through that. Thaddeus Williams, who's a professor at Biola University, author of a number of really good books, one entitled Don't Follow Your Heart. He's going to help us deal with the expressive individualism that is absolutely pervasive in the culture. This is the idea that I am the authority. My desires, my thoughts, my feelings are the authority on truth and what's true for me. And we see that infecting everything, as well as another idea. And in California, Monique Deson from the Center of Biblical Unity is going to hit on critical theory. And this is, in fact, the subtitle is The Worldview That Is Poisoning Everything. And we just see critical theory just permeating our culture as well. And she's going to help us address that. And then I'm going to close up the fourth main session with a talk on courage. How do we develop courage to engage the culture? And you already mentioned, Ryan, that we have a student track. We have multiple tracks. For the California conference, we have a student track that you'll be speaking at. Jonathan Morrow from Impact 360 will also be speaking at that. We have a parent track that my wife, Erin Kunkel, will be speaking at, dealing with unique parent issues. Yeah. We have a scientific apologetics track that Doug Axe, who's another professor from Biola and author of Undeniable, he's going to be doing that. He's going to be covering evolution in one of those, and then AI, which I'm fascinated to hear his take on AI. He's going to be doing that. We have a culture track that some of our speakers will be doing, and then also a theology track. So 5 different tracks that we'll have at the MAVEN conference. So it's a full day, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., a full day of really good training that often most Christians won't get or can't get. Yeah. And so we're gonna have a great day on Saturday, February 22nd.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it because I just think I'm grateful that Doug Axe is doing his talk on artificial intelligence in the breakout session that I am not speaking, because that is one that I want to sit through and hear kind of his approach to that topic is just one that is really, really important. Are people able to when they pick a track, are they kind of stuck in that track? Because I heard of a recent conference last weekend that like you kind of the talks build off of each other. So once you pick a track, you stay in it, or can they hit student track one, science track another?
Yeah, no, for our conference, we're all about the freedom of choice. We're big on liberty. And so we give you the choice to choose whatever track you want. You might see a topic in the parent track or the student track, and you might think, well, okay, I'm not a parent or I'm not a student, but you have the freedom to definitely go into those various tracks that you want. So get to go to the talks you want.
Yeah, I think that's a helpful point, right? We're not against choices. It's just what you choose. That's the question: is the choice to do what is what matters. And so there are wonderful choices that are good. Awesome. So more information I put in the description below at mavenconferences.com is the website there. Early bird is over, but you can still get pre-registration before February 17. Correct?
Yeah, pre-registration is one more week for the California conference. It closes next Monday. That's February the 17th. And it closes at midnight to get the pre-registration price. And there will be registration available at the door on a first come, first served basis and based on availability. There is an extra bonus for those who want to come to the California conference. The first 400 registrants will receive a free book from Crossway Publishers.
And I reviewed that book here on this channel last year. Is Christianity Good for the World?
Yeah. So that's just another bonus. And so go to mavenconferences.com and you can find information on all 3 of the conferences, California, Texas, and Indianapolis.
Perfect. Awesome, Brett. Well, thanks for jumping over. And yeah, just, man, this has been a conference that I have obviously been on staff at MAVEN. I've been at every single year. This will be my first time speaking, but it's just been such an encouraging time. And it's just also a great time just to get out and hang out with Christians and be physically present and engage in conversations over lunch and at breaks and see the different resources. And so I'll be there as well, not only speaking in the breakout, but chatting about our immersive experience program and our open enrollment trip. And so it's a fun time, and generally the weather is good. It's Southern California. You can't complain about that. And we know people, I have a friend that's up in North Dakota, and he comes down every year because it's like, hey, this is my chance to escape the freezing cold North Dakota and enjoy some Southern California sun. So you don't even have to live in Southern California to come out to the conference. It'd be good to see you guys there. So, Brett, thanks for jumping on and talking about conferences with me.
Yeah, we'll see you and hopefully some of your viewers at the conference.
Absolutely. All right.
Thanks,
Have a
Ryan.
good one. Yep. See ya. Alrighty. Well, we have about 25 minutes left in the show. Oh, I forgot to ask my question to you, Dad. My dad's question is, when are you coming to Colorado? So I will connect with you. I'll text you after the show. You can talk to our conference coordinator about new locations. But I think it would be fun to set something up. All right. Mears had asked one more question. He had to run. So he said, I said, hey, why don't you join me? Let's chat after I get done talking to Brett. And he had to run. But he said, but he's not calling in because he has some deadlines. Plus, he's not really pro-abortion. And so I think, that's kind of where he's coming from. But I think what is helpful to think through the questions that Mears is asking. He sent one more that says, would you save a 1-week embryo that is your wife is carrying, or Timmy, who you do not know? And again, I think that, again, these questions seem like a red herring, where we're bringing up things that really, like, okay, can you give me a scenario where I would have to choose between Timmy and my 1-week embryo? And I don't even know what that scenario would even look like, where somehow my 1-week-old embryo inside my wife, and it's up to Timmy and I have to make a choice. But what this is simply showing is this, and here's, I think, the value, is the reason this is a difficult question, or at least is even a question being asked to show, is that there is a moral dilemma, because there is a weightiness to morality. That if it really did not matter, if Timmy's life was not valuable and the embryo's life was not valuable, then it would be like, whatever, who cares? Just pick one, pick neither. It doesn't matter. But the fact that there is this challenge or this question, like the trolley example, do you save the one person lying on the tracks or the 10 people lying on the tracks? Do you pull the lever or not pull the lever? The reason these moral questions exist is because there's a weight to moral questions, as if these decisions actually matter. And so the question is, there's so many factors here of why Timmy versus my embryo, my unborn child's life is on the line. But again, I have a moral obligation, as Brett was just saying there, to protect my family as well as others. And just because I protect my kid doesn't mean others are not valuable. And so the issue here, I think, still remains, is we recognize it would still, whether I choose to save one or the other, this is where difficulty comes in, is who do I save? But what we do recognize, if Timmy is fine and Timmy is going to survive, and I just, for no reason other than I don't like Timmy, or I just say, I'm going to kill Timmy, and I take the life of young Timmy unjustifiedly, then we recognize that's wrong. You can't do that, because that life is valuable. And the question is, okay, well, why is his life valuable that I can't just kill him for whatever reason? And can that same logic be applied to the unborn? And what I kind of alluded to at the beginning of today's show is that very question of, often when you hear why you can take the life of the unborn, but you can't take the life of little 3-year-old Timmy, is often because of 4 factors. Size. The unborn is very, very, very small, and therefore it is less valuable. Size is a matter of value, but we realize that size doesn't determine value, because born babies are smaller than adult humans, but they're not less valuable just because they're smaller. You often hear L, level of development, that they are less developed. They haven't developed a nervous system, or they haven't developed this, or they haven't developed that. And so they haven't developed consciousness, is a big one. And so because they are less developed, then they are less valuable. But we recognize that level of development doesn't determine value either. Little Timmy is less developed than an adult. Little Timmy hasn't gone through puberty. Little Timmy doesn't have a fully developed brain that doesn't stop developing until you're like 25. But we recognize being less developed does not equal less value. Your value doesn't depend on your level of development. E, environment. The unborn is inside the womb versus outside. We recognize, though, that your environment, your location does not determine value. Where you are does not determine what you are or how valuable you are. And so the unborn being inside the womb versus outside does not, that journey down the birth canal doesn't just place human value on someone because they changed a location. Or degree of dependency. The unborn are very dependent on the mother. That's true. But people with certain diseases are dependent on medications. Older people sometimes are dependent on ventilators. There's many people that we can show are dependent. But just because you depend on someone, I mean, my 1.5-year-old is dependent on me. If it wasn't for me or some other adult, he would die. He can't cook. He can't feed himself. I mean, he can feed himself if I hand him food. But he would run outside and eat the first thing on the ground and probably kill himself before he found something nutritious. Does that mean that he's less valuable because he's dependent more on me than I am dependent on others? Of course not. And so the SLED acronym, size, level of development, environment, degree of dependency, is often the 4 broad categories that people go to justify why you can take the life of the unborn and not the born, is that they fall into one of these 4 areas. But we recognize that doesn't change value. And so in one sense, I think that it's like I said, a kind of a red herring to keep bringing up, well, who would you pick in this scenario? Who would you pick in this scenario? Because we can do this for infinity, forever. Just keep on, okay, well, what if it's your born child versus a 15-year-old? What if it's this or that? And the question is, the reason why it's sometimes is a difficult question is because we're talking about valuable human beings, and these questions matter. If it's not difficult, that still doesn't prove that little Timmy is not valuable. All right, so Huck Walsh sent in a question with some clarification. So let me kind of look at your question clarification. Again, we got about 20 or so minutes left if anyone wants to call in or have other questions. It says, have you looked at the differences between pro-life and abortion abolitionists? If so, curious on your thoughts. I responded, well, so what differences in what sense? I used to be pro-life, but now I'm firmly an abolitionist. I feel their position is biblical and have yet to find someone who can refute that. Are you familiar with the Dublin Declaration? So I can't think of the Dublin Declaration right now off the top of my head. And so I would put it this way. I think it depends on what we mean by pro-life. Because I would say that many pro-lifers are abolitionists, meaning they want to abolish abortion. They want to get rid of abortion. And so there are abolitionists in many different senses. You can be an abolitionist when it comes to the death penalty. There are abolitionists when it came to slavery, and there are abolitionists when it comes to abortion, that we want to end this. We want to end the death penalty. We want to end slavery. We want to end abortion. So an abolitionist can be applied to many different things. And versus pro-life is generally a more broad term, often applied to abortion, but can apply in other areas as well. So I think it often depends on how you want to define these different terms. I would say that I am pro-life. But I'm also am an abolitionist. I think it's a both and. And so I would be curious, though, to look into what you mentioned here further and discuss it on the show in the future. I just think that both of these positions, that look, I am pro-life. I'm for the life of the unborn because we are called to value, protect the living, and to protect valuable human life that God has created. And so because of that, if there's this practice that's called abortion that intentionally takes the life of an innocent human being, then we should want to abolish that. Now, where there's disagreement, and I think this can also be helpful to think through as well, is what is the best way to abolish something. And there's a difference that some people have of those who are kind of like an all or nothing abolitionist. Like if I can't get it completely abolished, then don't talk to me, so to speak. I just want to get it all or nothing. Others that are called more like what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of incremental abolitionists. Like, hey, as long as we're getting closer. So someone like this was like someone that is all or nothing would say, like, if a state is going to present a law that says, hey, look, we are going to outlaw abortions except for in the cases of, rape, incest, and life of the mother. An all or nothing person would say, nope, not good enough. It's got to be all or nothing. I wanted this completely gone. And so allowing for any sort of exemptions is not okay I won't sign it. I'm not going to support that. An incrementalist would say, well, hey, that's better than nothing. We're moving in the right direction. And maybe they, and say, well, I don't like that. I wish it wasn't that. I wish those exceptions weren't there, but we're moving in the right direction, getting rid of it in all the rest of the cases. And maybe we'll keep working our way to where it is completely abolished. Someone on the other side may say, well, no, but allowing for those exceptions makes it seem normalized to have those exceptions. And maybe it's harder to get them abolished after you've allowed for them than to just say no from the beginning. And so there's definitely going to be debate. And I think this is where we maybe need to, or it's helpful to have these sort of conversations, to recognize maybe we all have the same goal and we disagree on how to best get there. But we have this goal of saying, because I am pro-life, I am in favor of life, therefore I want to see this abolished. I want to see this ended. Now, on a follow-up kind of with that, because I brought it up, an objection often comes up of, well, okay, if you're pro-life, why not in these other issues, like in the death penalty? Now, notice the main distinction. What is the death penalty compared to abortion? How are they different? What comes to mind? Think about what we talked about in the show so far. Abortion is the taking of an innocent human life. The unborn has not done anything, is without justification, and it's the innocent human life. What is the death penalty? The death penalty is the taking of guilty human life, right? If we gave the death penalty to innocent human beings, we all recognize that would be wrong. If I just take some random innocent person off the street, throw them into death row and put them to the death penalty, everyone would go, whoa, that's not okay. Now, if we take some convicted mass murderer caught in the act, we all know it was him, think of a mass bomber, think of Hitler, whatever it may be, and it's clearly this person is guilty of a heinous crimes, and give that person the death penalty. Some of us may not be comfortable with that because we may want to not have the death penalty. We maybe want to argue for life in prison, and that's fine, but we would not react in the same way as just grabbing an innocent person, because we recognize the major difference here is being pro-life with the innocent human being, but then still being able to be pro-death penalty with a guilty human being. Now, I'm not necessarily pro-death penalty. I don't have a super strong conviction on this, but when I took a class from Dr. Scott Ray in graduate school on ethics, he presented different positions that one can take, being what he called a principled abolitionist, that it is wrong in principle and should just be done. The death penalty is wrong in principle and therefore it should be abolished. And I have a hard time justifying this position biblically, since we see God in Scripture commanding the Israelites and others to give the death penalty for certain crimes. And so I have a hard time justifying or giving a biblical argument for it being wrong in principle. Now, there's also a retentionist that just says, well, let's keep it. It's fine. But there's a third category that says there's what he calls the functional abolitionist, that our system does not function well, that we have knowingly convicted and given the death penalty to what we later found out were innocent people. And so because our system does not function well, because we know there are known mistakes, maybe it's just better to push pause and not have it and just give life in prison instead, because that can be easier. Now, some people argue, well, it's more expensive to do life in prison than it is to do death penalty, and that's actually debatable. And that some will argue actually death penalty is more expensive because of all the checks and balances and all the ways that you want to go through to make sure that you're making the right decision before you take their life, and actually having them in solitary confinement in jail makes it more expensive while they sit on death row. And so that can be debated. But I think there is this category of saying, well, it's not wrong in principle, but our system, our way of doing it maybe doesn't function well. And so I'm more comfortable with just not having it. And that's kind of where I land, except for when we talk about these really clear cut examples of people doing these horrible, horrible evils. And I want to be like, yeah, but in that case, maybe. And so I fluctuate, but I think this is a different conversation, because we're talking about someone who is guilty, deserving punishment, than the innocent that we are calling us to protect. So that's where I see a big, big difference. So let me just pause for a second and say, if there are any other questions or callers. Oh, I realize I'm on the wrong link. If someone's trying to call in, I was on the wrong link. If there's any callers or questions, now is your last chance to send them in, or else I'm going to end the show 10 minutes early today. Again, hopefully this is helpful to kind of think through some of these things. Again, trying to open up to questions and your thoughts to address the challenges that you're facing. I think that's where I'm trying to do is I think it's helpful just to think through like, how have you been challenged? How are you confused rather than me trying to think, well, I think you've been challenged this way and I think this is confusing you, but maybe I'm just talking about things that don't actually impact you. So that's hopefully helpful in what I'm trying to do here. So again, future shows next month, the chapter 3 in this book is going to be sexuality. So if you want to pick up a copy, from Crossway, What Do I Say When by Andrew and Christian Walker. That is going to be the show next month is on sexuality. Next week, The Great Tradition of Christian Thinking, a Student's Guide by David Dockery and Timothy George, part of the Reclaiming the Christian Intellectual Tradition from Crossway as well. Next month is going to be the Biblical and Theological Studies version of this. So if you want to pick up either of these booklets, they're about 80 or so pages. Walking through different topics. That's what we're going to be talking about the next 2 months. And then again, the big one, I don't have a date for this yet because it's like an 80 or 90 page chapter. And it's going to take me like 5 hours to walk through or more. And so chapter 2 of Natural Theology is the Leibnizian cosmological argument. So that'll be some point in March, walking through that one as well. So those are the future shows. Again, February 21, lecture at Biola on cosmology. February 22, the MAVEN conferences, mavenconferences.com, as well as I'll be leading a trip to Utah this summer in July. If you're a high school or college student, want to go on that with me. If you're interested in having me speak at any upcoming event that you may have, I do live speaking events all over. Please contact speaking at think-well.org if you want more information on that. And I'd love to chat with you and see about the possibility of joining your group and helping your group think about things that matter and approaching these most difficult, challenging topics with compassion and clarity is my goal. So with that being said, I don't see any final questions or comments or calls. And so I am going to sign off. As always, there's tons of other content, hopefully here, that continues to help you think well about the culture and the faith and engage it well. I have a training letter that's going out soon on a logical fallacy called the is-ought fallacy. So if you want to get email training letters from me, you can sign up in the description below on YouTube where it says Think Well Training Letters. If you want to participate in this sort of conversation, you can do so at social media at Ryan Pauly 3. I have an Instagram Think Well channel that I want to talk through these different topics. And so you can sign up there as well and continue this conversation offline. But until then, until next week, talking about this here book, have a wonderful rest of your week and a good rest of your day. Continue thinking deeply about these things because these things really are worth thinking about. See you next week, everybody. Have a good one. Goodbye.